The first lie told at my mother's funeral wasn't spoken maliciously. That was what made it difficult. It arrived wrapped in sympathy, in tears, in certainty, and by the time I realized how quickly it was spreading through the room, nearly everyone seemed to believe it. The funeral home was crowded. Relatives I hadn't seen in years filled the rows of chairs. Old neighbors stood quietly near the walls. Family friends exchanged stories in hushed voices. At the center of nearly every conversation stood my sister, Rebecca. People hugged her, praised her, thanked her for everything she had supposedly done for our mother. I sat several rows back, not hiding, just observing. Over the years, I had learned something about family narratives. The person speaking most confidently often became the person people believed. Rebecca had always understood that better than anyone. As guests gathered before the service began, I overheard fragments of conversation. Your mother was lucky to have you. You were there for her every day. You sacrificed so much. Rebecca accepted each compliment with a sad smile. She never directly claimed anything false. She simply never corrected assumptions. That had always been her talent. The service started. Photographs appeared on a screen at the front of the room, images from decades of birthdays, holidays, vacations, and ordinary afternoons. Watching them felt like losing my mother all over again. For a while, nothing else mattered. Then the eulogies began. A cousin spoke first, then an old friend. Finally, Rebecca stepped forward. She spoke beautifully. That was the problem. Everything she said sounded true, at least partially. She described our mother's strength, her generosity, her stubborn sense of independence. People nodded, some wiped away tears. Then the story slowly shifted. Rebecca began describing their relationship. How close they were, how deeply involved she had been during our mother's final years, how much she had supposedly carried alone. The room absorbed every word. I stared at the floor, not because I was angry, because I was tired. The last 3 years of my mother's life had been complicated. She had needed help with appointments, bills, transportation, medication schedules, insurance paperwork, endless phone calls, endless forms. None of it was dramatic. Most caregiving isn't. It happens in waiting rooms and parking lots. It happens during lunch breaks and after work. It happens quietly. And quiet things are easy to forget, especially when someone else tells a better story. Rebecca's voice trembled at exactly the right moments. Relatives looked at her with admiration. A few glanced toward me, not accusingly, almost dismissively, as though my role had been minor. The strange thing was that I still didn't want to interrupt. This was our mother's funeral. Correcting people felt inappropriate, petty. Even so, I stayed silent. After the service, everyone moved into the reception area. Conversations resumed. The narrative continued expanding. People repeated Rebecca's version to one another. Each retelling made it seem more certain, more established, more complete, until it barely resembled reality. I wandered toward a side table covered with photographs. Many of the pictures had been selected by our mother months before she died. She had organized everything carefully. That was who she was, prepared, thoughtful, determined. As I stood there, a man approached the microphone near the front of the room. Most people recognized him immediately. Martin, the attorney handling my mother's estate. His appearance wasn't unexpected. My mother had requested that a brief statement be shared after the funeral. The room gradually quieted. Martin unfolded a document. I'd like to honor a request your mother left regarding today's gathering. Conversation stopped. Everyone listened, including Rebecca. Martin explained that my mother had prepared several personal letters intended to accompany her estate documents. One section addressed her children directly. Another addressed family members collectively. His voice remained professional, steady, unemotional, exactly the way attorneys tend to sound. Then he began reading. My mother's words filled the room. She thanked both of us, not one of us, both. She described the different ways we had supported her. Rebecca's visits, my logistical help, Rebecca's companionship, my reliability, the rides, the appointments, the paperwork, the responsibility she knew often went unnoticed. Several people shifted in their seats. Martin continued. My mother had been unusually specific, not because she anticipated conflict, because she hated misunderstandings. She wrote that neither child had carried her alone. Neither child deserved sole credit. Neither child should allow grief to become competition. Silence settled over the room, heavy, unavoidable. Nobody looked shocked. The truth rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives quietly, like a light turning on. Suddenly revealing details that had always been there. Martin finished reading, folded the papers, and stepped away. No confrontation followed, no argument erupted. Rebecca stared down at her hands. I couldn't tell what she was feeling. Embarrassment, regret, defensiveness, maybe all three, maybe none. The relatives who had spent the afternoon praising one version of events suddenly seemed uncertain, not because they had been deceived, because they had accepted a simple story when reality had been more complicated. A few people approached me afterward. They spoke differently than before, more carefully, more thoughtfully. Not apologizing, just recalibrating. And honestly, that was enough. As the gathering slowly ended, I found myself standing beside one of my mother's photographs. She was smiling in it, the same patient smile I remembered from childhood, the smile that appeared whenever her children were being stubborn. I wished she were still there, not to defend me, not to settle scores, just to be there. That was the thing grief never negotiates. You can correct misunderstandings, you can restore context, you can even reclaim forgotten truths. But none of it brings anyone back. When I finally left, the evening sun was beginning to fade. Rebecca and I exchanged a brief glance across the parking lot. Neither of us spoke. Too much history existed for easy resolution, yet something had changed. Not victory, not reconciliation, just clarity. For years, my sister had wanted ownership of the story. That afternoon, our mother quietly took it back, and somehow, that felt like the most honest farewell either of us could have received.